Liam makes 7 figures. He wears watches that cost more than my first car. Yet, here he was claiming he needed to share a bed with me to save $200. The mattress dipped under his weight, a slow, heavy yield that signaled a shift in gravity I wasn't prepared for. The room was dark, but the scent of his cedarwood body wash cut through the air, sharp and familiar. He was lying less than 6 inches away, his back to my chest. This wasn't just a room mix-up. It was a dangerous erosion of a 10-year friendship defined by strict boundaries. And I let it happen. To understand why, we have to go back to the lobby where the first lie was told. We call it a friendship, but really, it's an architecture. A structure built over a decade of college dorms, shared apartments, and the kind of bro dynamic that is so rigid, it feels like a cage. Liam and I have been best friends since freshman orientation. We've survived bad breakups, career pivots, and family tragedies. But we survived them from a safe distance. There was always a line. He was the effortless, charismatic straight guy, loud, tactile, and seemingly oblivious to the effect he had on people. Specifically, the effect he had on me. I was the anchor, the safe harbor, the best friend who listened when his relationships imploded. And right now, his relationship was definitely imploding. Her name was Chloe. She was vibrant, demanding, and currently blowing up his phone with text messages that made his jaw tight every time he looked at the screen. I watched him check his notifications in the cab ride from the airport. He didn't reply. He just sighed, that heavy, frustrated sound of a man who feels trapped, and shoved the phone back into his pocket. "She's just stressed," he said, staring out the window at the gray skyline of the city. "We're all stressed." I nodded, playing my part, the supportive listener, the one who doesn't ask too many questions. Inside, I was exhausted. It takes a specific kind of energy to maintain a mask for 10 years, to constantly monitor your own gaze, your own tone, ensuring nothing slips through that might betray the fact that you aren't just listening, you're yearning. I had perfected the art of being just one of the guys. It was a survival mechanism. If I never crossed the line, I'd never lose him. We were in town for a corporate conference. 3 days of high-stakes networking, bad coffee, and fluorescent lights. It was the kind of environment where you cling to the one person you know like a lifeline. Liam relied on me for grounding. I relied on him, well, for everything else. He turned to me as the cab pulled up to the hotel, flashing that grin that usually got him whatever he wanted. "Hey, thanks for coming on this trip, man. Seriously, I don't think I could handle the corporate sharks without my wingman." "Wingman. Right," I said, forcing a smile. But then he said something strange. "Budget's tight this quarter, huh? Company is really cracking down on expenses." I frowned. We worked for different departments, and Liam was a top earner. The idea that he needed to pinch pennies on a hotel room seemed odd. But looking at him then, seeing the tension in his shoulders and the way he avoided my eyes, I didn't push back. I accepted the premise because I wanted to alleviate whatever pressure he was feeling. "Yeah, corporate is a nightmare," I agreed, grabbing my bag. We walked through the revolving doors into the chilled air of the lobby, the noise of the city cutting out instantly. The marble floors reflected the lights above, creating a sense of cold, impersonal luxury. We approached the front desk side by side, just as we had 100 times before, but this time the air felt different, heavier, charged with an intent I couldn't quite name yet. The receptionist smiled, her manicured fingers hovering over the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Checking in for 2?" she asked, her eyes darting between us. This was the moment, the junction where reality could have split in 2 directions. The logical path was simple. 2 keys, 2 rooms, 2 separate sanctuaries where we could decompress and ignore the world. But Liam leaned over the counter, adopting that specific posture he uses when he's closing a deal, elbows down, leaning in, charming but immovable. "Actually," he said, and I heard the slight, tight pitch change in his voice that happens when he's improvising. "There was a mix-up with the booking codes. I need to cancel the second reservation. We're going to consolidate to one room." The receptionist paused, her brow furrowing. "I don't see a restriction on the second room, sir. You have 2 superior kings booked under the corporate account." "I know," Liam interrupted, laughing, that easy, confident sound that usually disarms everyone, though to me it sounded brittle. "It's an internal compliance thing. New policy came down this morning. If I bill for 2 separate suites, I'm going to be filling out variance forms until Christmas. Just put us in one. It saves the company money, saves me a headache. It's fine." I stood there, gripping the handle of my suitcase, watching him dismantle our privacy in real time. My brain was firing warning shots. We are 30 years old. We don't share rooms. But the instinct to smooth things over, to be the easygoing friend who doesn't cause a scene in a 4-star hotel lobby, kicked in. I didn't want to cause a scene or question his logic in the middle of the lobby. So when he glanced at me, eyes wide and silently pleading for backup, I just nodded. "Yeah," I said, the word tasting like ash. "It's fine. Just one room." The elevator ride was silent. We walked down the endless hallway, the carpet dampening our footsteps until we reached room 412. He tapped the card. The light turned green. We walked in. It was a standard high-end hotel room, beige walls, abstract art that meant nothing, and a window overlooking the gray city. But the center of gravity was the bed. It wasn't 2 queens. It was 1 king. A massive white expanse of duvet and pillows that looked less like furniture and more like an arena. It dominated the space, swallowing the room whole. I stopped in the entryway. "Liam," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It's a king." He didn't even look. He was already throwing his blazer onto the armchair, loosening his tie with a sharp tug. "Is it? They probably didn't have doubles left. Whatever. It's huge. You won't even know I'm there." He turned then, catching my eye, and for a split second the mask slipped. He looked tired. Not sleepy tired, but soul tired. "Unless you're weird about it, I can go down and fight with them if you want. Tell them we need a cot." He knew I wouldn't send him back down. He knew I wouldn't be the one to make it weird. "Don't be an idiot," I said, wheeling my bag further in. "It's fine. We've slept on worse." "Exactly," he said, unzipping his suitcase on the luggage rack. "Remember that futon in sophomore year? The one with the broken spring that stabbed you in the kidney? This is the Ritz compared to that." He was using our history as a shield. He was invoking the bro code where bodies are just objects and proximity means nothing. But we weren't sophomores anymore. We were men. And that futon was a necessity born of poverty. This bed was a choice born of something else. I watched him unpack. There is a strange, terrifying intimacy in watching someone you love but cannot have settle into your space. He took out his toiletries, the cedar wash, the heavy deodorant, the razor, and walked into the bathroom. I followed, watching as he lined them up on the marble vanity next to mine. 2 toothbrushes in the glass. His cologne bottle touching my shaving cream. It looked domestic. It looked like a morning routine we had practiced for years, a visualization of a life we hadn't earned. He hung his shirts in the closet, mixing them with mine. The visual of his blue Oxford sleeve brushing against my gray blazer felt illicit. He was filling the room with his presence, claiming the territory, making it impossible to pretend this was just a temporary arrangement. He kicked off his shoes, leaving them in the middle of the floor, just like he used to do in our apartment. "I'm gonna shower," he announced, grabbing a towel. "Then we need to hit the mixer." He walked into the bathroom and closed the door. I stood in the silence, staring at the bed. The duvet was perfectly smooth. The pillows were fluffed. It was a blank canvas, waiting for us to ruin it. I sat on the edge, testing the mattress. It dipped easily, too easily. And I knew, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, that not knowing he was there was going to be physically impossible. The lie was logged. The logistics were settled. Now we just had to survive the night. The transition from roommates to bedmates happened with the flip of a switch. One moment, the room was a standard hotel suite, illuminated by the safe, neutral glow of bedside lamps. The next, Liam reached over, mumbled a "night, man," and plunged us into sudden, absolute darkness. That darkness changed the physics of the room instantly. We had constructed what I can only describe as a demilitarized zone. Before the lights went out, I had subtly arranged the extra pillows down the center line of the mattress, a fluffy white Berlin wall meant to demarcate his territory from mine. I clung to the absolute edge of the mattress on the left side, my shoulder practically hovering over the carpet. I lay rigid, straight as a board, arms crossed over my chest like a corpse in a coffin, determined not to cede a single inch of ground. Liam, of course, had no such reservations. He didn't understand the geometry of the situation because he didn't have to. To him, this was just sleep. Within 3 minutes, his breathing shifted. It deepened, slowing into a rhythmic, heavy cadence that told me he was already gone. He sprawled. That's the only word for it. He occupied space with the careless arrogance of someone who has never had to shrink himself to be safe. I felt the mattress shudder as he kicked a leg out, collapsing my carefully constructed pillow wall. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with the kind of static you can feel on your skin. Deprived of sight, my other senses went into overdrive. I could hear the fabric of the duvet rustling every time he shifted. I could smell the faint, lingering scent of his toothpaste mixed with the cedar body wash. But mostly, I could feel the heat. It defied the laws of thermodynamics. He was feet away, separated by high thread count cotton and a sliver of air, yet his body heat radiated across the gap like a physical wave. It was a warm front moving in, pressing against the cold reserve I was trying so desperately to maintain. I lay there for hours, staring at where I knew the ceiling was, afraid to move. If I turned over, the mattress would dip. If the mattress dipped, he might roll toward me. And if he rolled toward me, the fragile illusion that we were just two bros saving a buck on a corporate trip would shatter. So I remained a statue, cataloging every breath he took, tortured by the proximity. Then, around 2 a.m., the inevitable happened. Liam groaned in his sleep, a low, rough sound in his throat, and rolled. The movement was seismic. The mattress yielded under his shoulder, pulling me slightly toward the center, despite my grip on the edge. He flung an arm out, searching for purchase in the dark. His hand landed on my stomach. It wasn't a grab. It was a heavy, dead-weight flop of a limb. His palm rested flat against my t-shirt. His fingers curled loosely just above my hip bone. The contact seared through the fabric like a brand. I stopped breathing. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was terrified he would feel the vibration through his fingertips. Logic screamed at me to move. His hand. To cough, to shift, to wake him up and laugh it off. Dude, get off me. That was the line. That was the script. But I didn't say the line. I lay there, paralyzed not by fear, but by a terrifying, overwhelming want. I let his hand stay. I let the weight of his arm anchor me to the mattress. In the safety of the pitch black, where no one could see my face, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to pretend, just for a moment, that this wasn't an accident, that he had reached for me because he knew I was there. He murmured something unintelligible, his fingers twitching slightly against my side, and then settled deeper into sleep. He didn't pull away, and God help me, neither did I. I lay awake until the gray light of dawn began to bleed through the curtains, guarding the hand on my stomach like it was a secret I had stolen. The alarm cut through the room at 6:30 a.m., a shrill digital scream that shattered the heavy, suspended atmosphere of the night. Liam moved first. His arm, the one that had been a heavy, warm anchor on my stomach for 4 hours, jerked back as if he'd touched a hot stove. He sat up, rubbing his face with both hands, his hair a chaotic mess. And for a second, he looked at me with a disorientation that mirrored my own. There was a beat of silence, a fragile moment where the reality of the night hung between us, unacknowledged but undeniable. But then the blink happened. The shutter came down. The best friend software reloaded. "Morning, 412, he mumbled, voice rough with sleep, swinging his legs out of bed and marching toward to the bathroom, without looking back. The routine that followed was a masterclass in performative efficiency. We navigated the small, tiled space of the bathroom with a polite, rigid choreography. I shaved while he showered. The steam fogged the mirror, blurring my reflection, which was a mercy because I didn't want to see the exhaustion in my own eyes. We moved around each other like magnets with the same polarity, creating a force field of personal space that hadn't existed 6 hours ago. We talked about the schedule, the keynote speaker, the coffee, anything but the arm, anything but the heat. We put on our suits like armor, layering starch and wool over skin that still felt too exposed. By the time we knotted our ties, the 2 men who had been tangled in the dark were gone, replaced by 2 corporate drones ready for battle. By 8 a.m., we were in the lobby. The transformation was terrifying. In the conference hall, Liam wasn't the guy who sprawled in his sleep or muttered about loneliness. He was Liam, the account executive. He was magnetic. I stood by the high-top tables, nursing a lukewarm coffee that tasted like burnt plastic, watching him hold court with a circle of potential clients. He laughed, throwing his head back, and the sound was bright and sharp, bouncing off the high ceilings. It was disorienting. I looked at his hands, currently gesturing expansively about Q3, projections, and all I could feel was the weight of them on my hip. I was the keeper of his shadow self, standing on the periphery while he performed in the light. He walked over to me mid-morning, dragging a VP from a tech firm with him. "And this," Liam said, clapping a hand onto my shoulder, "is the brains of the operation." The contact was meant to be fraternal, a locker room slap of camaraderie, but my skin was too sensitized. The nerves where his hand landed flared hot, remembering the slow, heavy pressure from the night before. I flinched, imperceptibly I hope, and forced a smile. The touch felt fraudulent here, under the fluorescent lights. It was a public claim that erased the private reality. Then came the joke. I heard him tell it 3 times before lunch. "Oh, we're cozy," he told a group of guys from sales, grinning as he stirred his drink. "Corporate tightened the belt, so we're bunking up. Real college throwback. I'm just hoping he doesn't snore." They laughed. He laughed. It was the perfect cover. By turning our proximity into a punchline about corporate cheapness, he neutralized it. He made it a funny anecdote about budget cuts rather than a confession of codependency. Every time he told the story, he looked at me for the confirmation, for the wingman nod. And every time, I gave it to him. I laughed along, validating the lie, helping him build the wall back up brick by brick, knowing that in 12 hours, we'd just tear it all down again. The second night didn't begin with a decision. It began with an omission. When we returned to the room 412, stripping off the armor of our suits and scrubbing the conference exhaustion from our faces, there was a heavy, unspoken shift in the atmosphere. The night before, I had built the pillow wall, that ridiculous, fluffy rampart of down and cotton meant to keep his world separate from mine. It was a physical manifestation of my panic, a barrier erected to protect a decade of friendship from the reality of my desire. But tonight, as I climbed into the left side of the king-sized bed, I didn't reach for the extra pillows. To rebuild the wall now would be an admission. It would be acknowledging that the first night had meant something, that his hand on my stomach had been an event rather than an accident. If I built the wall, I was saying I don't trust myself. If I left the space open, I could pretend we were just two tired adults who didn't need childish forts to sleep. So, I left the center of the mattress empty. It was a void, a no-man's land of white sheet that seemed to glow in the dim light. Liam climbed in a moment later. He didn't mention the missing wall. He just clicked off the lamp, plunging us back into the sensory deprivation tank of the room. But unlike the previous night, the silence didn't stretch tight. It deepened. The darkness acts as a solvent for the truth, dissolving the rigid social contracts we maintain while the sun is up. "Do you think we're doing this right?" His voice floated out of the gloom, disembodied and startlingly close. It wasn't the voice of the confident account executive who had charmed the room at the mixer. It was quieter, younger. "Doing what?" I whispered, staring up at where I knew the ceiling was. "Life," he said. The mattress shifted as he turned onto his side, facing me. I could feel the movement in the springs. I feel like I'm just checking boxes. Get the job. Get the girl. Buy the house. But I don't feel like I'm actually in it. I feel like I'm watching it happen to someone else. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the vulnerability he usually saved for his third drink, not his sober bedtime. "You're just tired, Liam. It's the burnout talking." "Maybe," he sighed, a long, ragged exhale that fanned across the darkness. "Or maybe I'm just tired of performing. It's exhausting, isn't it? Being the person everyone expects you to be." "Yeah," I breathed out. "It is." We fell silent, but the air between us was no longer empty. It was pressurized with the things we weren't saying. And then gravity took over. I don't know if the hotel mattress was actually sagging in the middle, or if it was a magnetic pull we were both too weary to fight, but the distance between us began to shrink. The DMZ evaporated. I felt the heat first, that familiar radiating warmth of another human body. Then, the contact. It started with his foot. In the deep drift of impending sleep, his leg slid across the smooth sheets. His ankle brushed against mine. A sharp, electric jolt shot up my spine. Logic dictated that I should pull away. I should retreat to the icy edge of the mattress to re-establish the boundary, but I didn't move. I held my breath, waiting for him to recoil, waiting for the sorry man and the retreat. But he didn't pull back. Instead, he settled. He let his leg slide further, his calf pressing against mine, a long, solid line of contact that felt heavy and deliberate. It wasn't a twitch. It wasn't a reflex. It was an anchor dropping into the sea. Then came the arm. He shifted, his shoulder pressing into the mattress, and his arm flopped over the center line. His hand didn't land on me this time, but it landed in the space between our faces. Fingers curled loosely on the sheet, inches from my nose. I lay there, paralyzed by the intimacy of it. This was the specific, terrifying confusion of loving a straight man. Was this just comfort? Was this how he slept with his brothers, with his college roommates? Was I reading a sonnet into a grocery list? Or was this something else? The way he sighed, a sound of deep, resonant relief as he pressed his leg firmer against mine, suggested that he needed this contact just as much as I did. He wasn't recoiling from the touch. He was drinking it in. The realization washed over me, cold and clarifying. He felt safe. To him, this wasn't sexual, or at least, he hadn't let himself think of it that way yet. It was just grounding. He was adrift in his own life, and I was the only solid thing he could hold on to. "Night," he murmured, the words slurring into sleep. Night, I whispered back. I didn't pull my leg away. I let the heat seep through my pajamas. A dangerous, addictive drug. The wall was gone. The distance was closed. And as I drifted off, tangled in the limbs of my best friend, I knew the danger wasn't that we would cross the line. The danger was that the line had already been erased, and neither of us was rushing to draw it back. The bubble didn't just pop, it was invaded. The disruption arrived at 11:45 p.m., just as the heavy, comfortable silence of the room had begun to settle around us like a protective blanket. We were in that liminal space between waking and sleeping, the television casting a mute, flickering blue light across the walls, the air thick with the humidity of the shower and the scent of cedar. I was reading. Liam was staring at the ceiling, his breathing slow and rhythmic. We were safe. Then the phone on the nightstand vibrated. It wasn't a ring. It was a violent, persistent buzzing against the wood veneer that sounded like a drill in the quiet room. The screen lit up, harsh and white, illuminating the ceiling. Chloe. The name flashed like a warning beacon. The shift in the room was instantaneous. The soft, fluid atmosphere of the last 48 hours crystallized into something sharp and brittle. Liam stared at the phone for 3 seconds. 3 long, agonizing seconds, where I saw his jaw tighten and the peace drain out of his face. Then, with a groan that sounded more like a growl, he snatched it up and slid out of bed. "Hello?" His voice was unrecognizable. The softness was gone, replaced by a defensive, weary edge that made my stomach turn. He walked to the window, putting his back to me, but the room was too small for secrets. I couldn't help but hear. I couldn't help but be the audience to the disintegration of his other life. "I'm not ignoring you," he said, his hand raking through his hair, gripping the back of his neck. "I'm working. It's a conference, Chloe. That's what happens at conferences." I lay perfectly still, staring at the spine of my book, trying to make myself invisible. I was the intruder now. I was the witness to a conversation that was supposed to be private. Yet I was also the reason the conversation was happening. I could hear the tinny, high-pitched cadence of her voice on the other end, frantic and demanding, though the words were lost. "I didn't text back because I didn't have anything to say," Liam snapped, and the cruelty of it hung in the air. "No, I'm not checking out. I'm just tired. Can we not do this now? Can we please not do this while I'm staring at a view of a parking garage at midnight?" I watched him pace. He moved like a caged animal, traversing the narrow strip of carpet between the window and the desk. He was wearing only his boxer briefs, his body tense, every muscle coiled, tight. This wasn't the man who had let his leg drift against mine an hour ago. This was a stranger. This was a man trapped in a life he had built, but no longer recognized. "Stop," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low register. "Just stop. You're spiraling. We'll talk when I get back." "No, not tonight. Goodbye." He didn't wait for a response. He pulled the phone from his ear and tapped the end call button with a force that threatened to crack the screen. Then he tossed the device onto the armchair. It landed with a dull thud that echoed the finality of the moment. The silence that rushed back into the room wasn't the comfortable silence of before. It was heavy. It was loaded with the debris of the argument. Liam stood by the window for a long time, his forehead resting against the cool glass, his breath fogging the pane. I didn't move. I didn't know if I was allowed to move. Eventually, he turned and walked back to the bed. He didn't get in. He sat on the edge, his back to me, his shoulders slumped forward in a posture of absolute defeat. He buried his face in his hands, his fingers digging into his scalp. "I can't do it," he whispered. The words were muffled by his palms, but they carried the weight of a confession. "I don't want to go back." My heart hammered against my ribs. The instinct to reach out, to place a hand on the curve of his spine, was overwhelming. But I hesitated. To the argument? I asked softly. He shook his head, finally dropping his hands to his lap. He looked over his shoulder at me, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow in the dim light. To the life, he said. The apartment, the wedding planning, the constant noise. It feels like I'm drowning in expectations, and the only time I can breathe is when I'm... He stopped. He didn't say when I'm with you. He didn't have to. The implication hung between us, suspended in the charged air. When you're away, I supplied, offering him the safer, cowardly out. Yeah, he breathed, turning fully to look at me. When I'm away. He looked at me then, really looked at me, with a vulnerability that stripped away the last of his defenses. I realized in that moment that I wasn't just his friend, and I wasn't just his roommate. I was the escape hatch. I was the sanctuary he retreated to when the reality of his choices became too heavy to bear. The realization was a double-edged sword. It thrilled me to be his safe harbor, but it terrified me to know that my value lay in being the alternative to his real life. You don't have to go back tonight, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. You're here. Just be here. Liam held my gaze for a heartbeat longer than was necessary. Then he nodded, a slow, resigned movement. Yeah, he murmured. I'm here. He swung his legs back into bed, but the energy had shifted. The anger had evaporated, leaving behind a heavy, aching sadness that filled the space between us. He didn't turn his back to me this time. He lay on his side, facing me, his eyes open, watching me in the dark. The phone lay silent on the chair across the room, a threat neutralized for now, but we both knew it would ring again. The outside world had breached the perimeter, and the safety of the bed felt fragile, temporary, and infinitely precious. By the third night, the pretense had completely evaporated. We didn't bother with the budget jokes anymore. We didn't make comments about the mattress softness or the room temperature. Those excuses belonged to a version of us that existed 48 hours ago. Two friends playing at being roommates. Now, as the lights clicked off, the room didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied. We lay on our backs, the sound of our breathing sinking up in the quiet. It wasn't just the proximity, it was the inevitability of it. The silence stretched out between us, not as a barrier, but as a bridge. Do you ever feel lonely? Liam's voice cut through the dark, quiet and rough. It wasn't a casual question. It was a stone dropped into a deep well, waiting to hear the splash. I hesitated, my heart skipping a beat. Sometimes, I whispered. Everyone does. No, he said, and I felt the mattress shift as he turned his head toward me. I don't mean being alone. I mean being with people, but feeling like you're a million miles away. The confession hung in the air, heavy and devastating. I know the feeling, I admitted, turning to face him. In the gloom, I could just make out the glint of his eyes, searching mine. It's the difference between being present and being real. Then he moved. It wasn't the accidental drift of sleep this time. It was a conscious, deliberate shift. He slid across the few remaining inches of sheet until his shoulder pressed against mine. The contact was electric. It started at the point of impact, bone against bone, heat against heat, and radiated outward, flooding my entire system with a rush of adrenaline and desire. He didn't stop there. His hand, which had been resting on his chest, moved slowly down to the mattress between us. It sought me out. His fingers brushed against my forearm, a tentative, questioning touch. When I didn't pull away, his hand settled on my wrist. It wasn't a grip. He didn't hold me. He just rested his hand there, a warm, heavy weight that felt like an anchor keeping him from drifting out to sea. Why is it so easy with us? He whispered, his breath hitching slightly. I spend my whole life fighting with Chloe, fighting at work, fighting to keep up this image. But here, with you, I just stop. I lay there, paralyzed by the terror and the thrill of it. This was the question I had asked myself 1,000 times in the privacy of my own head. Why us? But hearing him say it, hearing him acknowledge that this dynamic was unique, was dangerous, it validated everything I had been trying to suppress. Because I don't need you to be anything, I said, my voice barely audible. I just need you to be Liam. I think, he said, his thumb tracing a slow, rhythmic circle on the inside of my wrist, a touch so intimate it felt like a kiss. That you're the only person who actually knows who Liam is. The weight of his hand on my wrist felt like a promise. For this dark, suspended moment, I was chosen. He wasn't thinking about the woman waiting for him back home. He wasn't thinking about the variance forms or the budget. He was thinking about the heat of my skin and the safety of this bed. What if? He started, then stopped, the words catching in his throat. What if what? What if I don't want to go back to being invisible? We lay there in the silence, the question hanging unanswered between us. The what if danced around the edges of the room, a ghost of a future that we were both too afraid to name. We were skirting the edge of a cliff, looking down into the abyss of a relationship that could destroy everything or save us both. But as the rhythm of his breathing slowly synchronized with mine, and the heat of his shoulders seeped into my bones, a cold realization began to dawn on me. This was the third night. Tomorrow was the checkout. The conference was ending. The sanctuary we had built in room 412 had an expiration date, and it was hurtling toward us with the coming sunrise. The fantasy was about to collide with the real world, and I didn't know if we would survive the impact. The final night didn't arrive. It loomed. It hung over the room like a storm front, heavy with the pressure of impending expiration. We had spent 3 days constructing a temporary reality in room 412, a fragile ecosystem where the rules of our friendship had been rewritten in the dark. But now, the suitcases were half packed in the corner, gaping open like hungry mouths waiting to swallow the evidence of our intimacy. The flight confirmation emails were in our inboxes. The real world was clawing at the door. We lay in the dark for the last time. The silence was different tonight. It wasn't the tentative silence of the first night, or the comfortable silence of the second. It was the desperate, suffocating silence of two people who know they are running out of time. I stared at the outline of the window, listening to the city hum outside, a reminder that life was going on without us, indifferent to the seismic shift happening in this bed. Liam was lying on his back, his breathing uneven. He wasn't asleep. I could feel the tension radiating off him, a vibrating wire running through the mattress springs. Liam, I said. My voice sounded loud in the quiet room, cracking slightly under the weight of what I needed to say. He didn't move. Yeah? I turned my head on the pillow, looking at his profile. The faint light from the street lamp outside caught the sharp line of his jaw, the furrow of his brow. I needed to know. Before we went back to the masks, before we returned to the bro dynamic and the girlfriend and the separate lives, I needed to strip away the last layer of the lie. The company pays for the rooms, I said. It wasn't a question. It was a gentle demolition of the foundation he had built this entire week on. I checked the policy portal. Finance covers individual suites for all travel over 50 miles. There is no variance form. There is no budget cut. The silence that followed was absolute. It stretched tight, a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. I waited for him to deny it. I waited for him to invent a new lie, to claim he had misread the memo, to laugh it off with that charismatic deflection he used like a shield. He didn't. He let out a long, shuddering breath, the sound of a structure finally collapsing. I know, he whispered. So why? I asked. The question hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. Why the charade, Liam? Why $200? He turned then. The movement was slow, heavy with resignation. He rolled onto his side to face me, the distance between us shrinking to nothing. In the dark, his eyes were dark pools, unreadable but searching. Because I couldn't be alone, he confessed, the words tumbling out, rough and unpolished. Not this week. Not with everything going on in my head. The idea of walking into a hotel room, closing the door, and just existing in that silence, it terrified me. You could have just asked, I said softly. You didn't have to invent a compliance issue. Didn't I? He moved his hand, his fingers brushing against the pillowcase near my face. If I told you I was scared of the quiet, you would have come over for a drink, hung out for an hour, and then gone back to your room. That's what friends do, but I didn't want you for an hour. My heart stopped. The air in the room thinned, leaving me lightheaded. I didn't want a roommate, he continued, his voice dropping to a hush that felt like a secret. I didn't want to save money. I wanted this. This? I echoed, my pulse hammering in my throat. The proximity, he said. Knowing you were right there, hearing you breathe, feeling the mattress move. It's the only time in the last year I've felt like I wasn't falling apart. He shifted closer. The heat from his body was a physical force now, a magnetic field pulling me in. We were inches apart. If I moved my head a fraction forward, our noses would touch. I could smell the cedar wash, the warmth of his skin, the faint, metallic scent of adrenaline. It's not just loneliness, Liam, I whispered, the daring of the moment seizing me. You could have shared a room with anyone. You chose me. I always choose you, he breathed out. That's the problem, isn't it? I'm building a life with her, but I'm living it with you. The truth of it hit us both at once. The line wasn't just crossed, it was erased. We were staring at each other in the dark, stripped of every excuse. There was no budget. There was no mistake. There was only this terrifying, undeniable gravity. He leaned in. I saw his eyes, flickered down to my mouth, then back up to my eyes. The intent was there, hovering in the charged space between our lips. It was the kiss that doesn't happen, but is felt entirely. A phantom pressure, a ghost of a possibility that was more intense than any actual contact could be. My entire body tensed, waiting, wanting, terrified. But he didn't kiss me. Instead, he surged forward with a desperation that broke my heart. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, his arms wrapping around me in a fierce, crushing embrace. It wasn't a hug. It was a collision. He held onto me like a man drowning, his fingers digging into the fabric of my t-shirt, his leg hooking over mine to pull our hips together. I wrapped my arms around him, pulling him close, holding the back of his head. We lay there, tangled horizontally in the dark, chest to chest, heart to heart. It was intimate in a way that transcended sex. It was a confession of absolute need. Don't let go, he muffled against my shoulder. And I won't, I promised, closing my eyes against the sting of tears. I'm right here. And for that night, that was enough. The money was a lie. The budget was a lie. But the way he held me in the dark was the truest thing I had ever felt. We didn't wake up with a start. There was no flinching away from the contact this time. The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains, painting the room in a hazy, dreamlike gray, but neither of us moved. We were a knot that didn't want to be untied. My face was pressed against the back of his neck, breathing in the scent of sleep and skin. His arm was draped over his own chest, his hand resting backward to tangle loosely in my hair. We were spooning. There was no other word for it. It wasn't the accidental collision of limbs in the night. It was a deliberate, settled entanglement. My knees were tucked into the bend of his, fitting together with a terrifying, geometric precision. In any other timeline, In any other version of our friendship, this would be the moment of recoil. This would be where the no homo joke lands, where we scramble apart, laugh too loudly, and blame the smallness of the bed or the heaviness of the sleep. We would aggressively reclaim our masculinity with loud complaints about back pain or space. But the room remained silent. Liam was awake. I could tell by the shift in his breathing, the way the rhythm had changed from the deep, slow cadence of sleep to a lighter, more conscious pattern. He knew exactly where I was. He knew exactly how his body was curved around the space I occupied, and he didn't move an inch. He lay there, holding the moment still, refusing to let the morning reality intrude on the sanctuary we had built. We stayed like that for an hour. We ignored the vibrating alarm on his phone, which he silenced with a blind, fumbling hand before settling back into the warmth. We ignored the sounds of the hotel waking up around us, the distant hum of the elevator, the roll of housekeeping carts in the hall. We just existed in the safety of the contact. I could feel his heartbeat against my chest, a steady, thumping proof of life that felt synchronized with my own. It was a domesticity that felt stolen, a glimpse into a parallel universe where this wasn't a secret, but a Tuesday. The unspoken agreement hung heavy in the air. This changes everything. We didn't need to say it. The way he sighed, a sound of profound, aching contentment, said it for him. He was absorbing the peace, storing it up like a battery charge to survive the life he was about to return to. Eventually, the clock forced our hand. Checkout was at 11. The flight was at 1. The spell had to break. "We have to go," he whispered, his voice rough and unwilling. "I know," I replied, pulling back slowly. The physical separation felt violent. The cold air of the room rushed into the space between us, chilling the skin that had been warm for 8 hours. We got up in silence. The energy in the room shifted from sanctuary to funeral. Packing felt like dismantling a home. Every item we put back into our suitcases was a brick removed from the wall of our temporary reality. I watched him fold his shirts, the blue Oxford, the gray flannel, and place them next to the cedar wash bag. The toiletries were removed from the bathroom counter, leaving the marble cold and empty. The 2 toothbrushes that had stood together in the glass were separated, capped, and buried in dark luggage compartments. We moved around the room with a heavy, melancholic efficiency. We didn't look at each other, not because we were ashamed, but because looking would make it real. When the bags were zipped, the sound was final, a jagged tear in the silence. The room was just a hotel room again, beige, impersonal, and indifferent to the tragedy of our departure. The ride to the airport was defined by a different kind of silence. It wasn't the heavy, pregnant silence of the hotel room, nor the awkward silence of a disagreement. It was companionable, but thick with grief. We sat in the back of the cab, watching the gray city blur past. We didn't talk about the budget. We didn't talk about Chloe. We just sat with our shoulders touching, a point of contact we maintained from the hotel driveway to the terminal curb. It was a lifeline. It was Liam saying, without words, "I am still here. I am still with you." When the cab pulled up to the departure level, the chaos of the airport assaulted us. Horns honking, people shouting, the smell of exhaust. We unloaded our bags on the curb. This was it. He was flying west. I was flying east. We stood there amidst the swirling crowd, an island of stillness in the rush. Liam looked at me. The mask was gone again. He looked tired, stripped down, and terrified. He reached out and gripped my shoulder. It wasn't a bro slap. It was a squeeze, his fingers digging into the muscle, holding on as if he were afraid he might blow away. He started, then stopped. He looked at my mouth, then my eyes. "I don't know how to do this part." "Just go," I said softly, covering his hand with mine for a fleeting second. "It's okay." "It's not," he whispered, "but I have to." He didn't hug me. He knew, and I knew, that if we hugged now, here on this curb, he would never get on that plane. So he just nodded, a sharp, jerky motion, and turned away. I watched him walk through the automatic doors, his back stiff, dragging his suitcase back into his real life. He didn't look back. He couldn't. I'm back in my own bed now. It's a queen, not a king, but it feels massive. It feels like a wasteland. The silence here isn't peaceful. It's empty. We broke the architecture of our friendship, and now I have to live in the rubble. If you've ever let a lie become your truth, subscribe. Share your story in the comments. Until next time.